Come on in, and we're really thrilled today to be hosting so we call it the annual Noah Krieger Memorial Lecture, Noah Krieger of the class of '93 lecture. But this year we're hoping to have an additional Noah Krieger lecture in the fall of 2024. And so we are saying it's the spring Noah Krieger Memorial Lecture. And we are absolutely thrilled to welcome Carol and Sandy Krieger, who are in the audience, who have funded this lecture for many, many years at Brown, and are contributors to Brown. Also fund the Krieger internships that some of you have applied for or will apply for through the Taubman Center, which fund a full summer internship for those who have unpaid internships. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you for your contributions to Brown. So we are so excited to welcome Congressman Gabe Amo. We really, after Congressman Amo won his primary, and maybe he'll be talking about this, won the Democratic primary for Congressional District 1 in Rhode Island, we thought about sending an invitation. And my name is Wendy Schiller, and I'm the director of the Taubman Center, and I also comment on local politics. And I thought that was sort of not appropriate since the general election hadn't been held. But we literally sent an invitation the next day after the election because we were so anxious to host Congressman Amo. So we're thrilled that he's made the time to come here. So I am going to read some of his bio, not all of it, because we'll probably have that. And then you'll speak for 20, 25 minutes or something like that. Around there. And then we are going to open it up to questions, and there are mics here, and you're welcome to come up and line up and ask questions. And I have a few questions as well in case we run out of student and constituent-generated questions. So, Congressman Amo has spent most of his career in public service in Rhode Island and Washington, D.C. In the Biden White House, he served as special assistant to the president and deputy director of the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. We do have a Brown undergraduate graduate, Kellen. Do you remember Kellen? Yes, and she worked with you in that office. And he worked as the principal liaison to mayors and local elected officials. In that role, he connected state and local leaders across the country with the federal resources made available to them through historic legislation like the American Rescue Plan, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. He also coordinated responses to major national crises, including gun violence, extreme weather, and public health emergencies. Previously, Congressman Amo was the Director of Public Engagement and Community Affairs for former Governor Gina Raimondo. He served as Governor Raimondo's principal advisor to Rhode Island cities and towns, business, labor advocacy, and faith communities. Earlier in his career, I'm not sure, because I think you're pretty young, and we keep going earlier in your career. Don't know, pretty young. He served in the Office of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs for President Barack Obama as a liaison to governors and state government officials. Congressman Amo is a native of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. I say Pawtucket. I'm not sure if should I be? Right. Okay, Pawtucket. Been here now 30 years. Still can't quite get it. And the son of two parents from West Africa. His mother's originally from Liberia, and his father is originally from Ghana. As the son of a mother who is a nurse and a father who owns a liquor store, he understands what it's like to grow up in a working-class family. His story is one that is familiar to many in Rhode Island, one of hard work, resilience, grit, and determination. So we are really thrilled to have you, and we want to welcome you up to the podium and look forward to your remarks.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that warm introduction and welcome. And certainly I want to add my thanks to the Krieger family for all that you've done to keep Noah's memory alive and to help so many other students here at Brown really dive into public policy and public service in a way that Brown makes especially valuable through settings like this and so many others. And there are a few reasons why it's a great honor for me to give this lecture, certainly in Noah's memory, but two other reasons stand out. First, I have to say it's kind of a full circle moment for someone who was rejected from Brown as a high school senior to now be able to represent Brown in the United States Congress. I did mention this to President Paxson in a meeting we had a few months ago. I don't think she found it as funny as I did, but you know, I've moved on. Second, the list of previous lecturers include historic figures like Congressman Elijah Cummings, cabinet members, senators. I was just with Chris Murphy last week in Munich, and I said, you know, I've been in this job for 14 weeks, and I'm giving a speech that you gave last year. And he said, that's interesting, Gabe. But in all seriousness, I am so honored to follow in the footsteps of so many people who have done so much for this country. And I'm hopeful that at the start of this journey, I'm able to contribute just a fraction of what they've been able to do. And I should also say Happy Black History Month. It's a special one for me this year, certainly being elected as the first Black member of Congress from the state of Rhode Island. So if you've come this evening, it's unlikely that I have to tell you that we're living in a particularly consequential moment, a time where it seems likely that the decisions that we are making today in government, both here and in Washington, are going to dictate what happens for a really long time. So it's times like these where we're embroiled in a conflict between hope and despair. And there are many indicators that suggest that there are feelings of despair that are running high and running rampant. And so this is a theme that I want to return to, hope and despair. And I think we'll all end up in the same place, but it might be a little difficult to get there. You know, polling by Gallup at the end of last year suggests that less than 1/3 of Americans are satisfied with the way that democracy is working, with Americans who have the least formal education feeling the most desperate about the state of our democracy. And the country is consumed not just with feelings of doubt about the ability of government to function properly, but feelings of anxiety, depression, rates of addiction, substance use disorder that impact far too many lives. And I know it's no help when you see the chaos from my new workplace, Congress, plastered across TVs every day, right? We're on the brink of a government shutdown for, what, the 5th time in recent months? And you know, I attribute that to extremism, attribute it to some of my colleagues who are less interested in getting things done and more interested in breaking down our institutions. So this is combined with ongoing economic anxiety, instability in the global theater, the dominance of rhetoric of division, all which threaten to upend the relative stability of the post-World War II order. I just saw this. I was in Munich at the Munich Security Conference, and with leaders throughout Europe, whose primary question to me was, is America going to show up? Are we going to continue to be the leader that we've been for so many decades? And so this is one of those things where I turn to literature. I turn to Maya Angelou. I turn to the thought that she put forward, right, when she says, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I feel like we should connect to those feelings in our government, in our world, and try to get back to a place where we're feeling good. I certainly want to be mindful of the context that we're in the world. I know that amongst many people, especially our young people, one of the central concerns driving how feelings of government are being carried forward is the current conflict between Israel and Hamas. And so I know I could not be up on a stage today without acknowledging just how the tragedy is played out. You know, people on whatever side of the issue you're on are right to be sad and angry and heartbroken. October 7th was devastating, and the resulting loss of innocent life has been just as devastating. And there is reason to be skeptical about leadership right now at a time like this, because we are seeing every day horror. But my hope is, and as the most junior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, but someone who is committed to finding peaceful resolutions, is that we arrive at some negotiated end to fighting between Israel and Hamas that sees a release of hostages and a surge in food, medical supplies, and personnel to respond to the living hell that so many people are going through. And certainly, we will have to think about the day after. The day after, the rebuilding, the making sure that we are not creating a new generation of people with hate and fear, but instead that we can demonstrate as part of a multinational coalition that we can arrive at a better tomorrow. And so that's my hope, but I think it's incredibly important that we start there. And I should also add that we have to really lock into our commitment to combat hate wherever we see it. Anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and so many more forms of hate should be a collective project to fight against. But when I was running for Congress, this is not what I thought I would be focusing on. You know, I did not think I'd be thinking about war and peace as much as I am now. In fact, I spent most of my time running thinking about domestic policy affecting the people I've known my whole life right here in Rhode Island. You see, I grew up in Pawtucket. I have that as part of my brand, even though I live on Benefit Street in Providence now. Don't hold it against me. I'm basically on campus. But the connection to this community is why I ran for this office. I ran because I truly believe that we all deserve elected officials who are a reflection of our collective values, our collective experiences, and our collective hopes. So tonight, I want to lay out in a few policy areas where I think those hopes lead me to contemplate a government that is active in people's lives and the approach the government should take to challenges. You know, we had a president in the 90s, a great one, Bill Clinton. He said, you know, the era of big government is over. I want to leave you with the charge that I think that government that is active, that is muscular, that is nimble, to confront the shifting challenges that we face can make people feel like we've experienced progress, right? I told you about that feeling about democracy. We need to tap into that, the capacities of government to be solutions-oriented, articulate our desires to make change, and running towards crises, not away from them, and make people feel like government can solve big problems. You know, our democracy works in the pursuit of progress and our highest founding ideals of freedom, of liberty for all, keenly aware of the challenges that exist. You know, Winston Churchill said, and he was right when he said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others that have been tried from time to time. We have something special, and I think we have to show its strength. And it requires a deep engagement of as many people as possible in order to bring those into the fold who have been disengaged or never engaged. Delivering results is the vehicle for that engagement, in my opinion. And so that progress requires action, and action requires hope. That progress is possible. And in many ways, for me, this is a simple equation and one that demands optimism from all of us who desire a better world. And so a few areas where I think about a large, a responsive, a nimble set of structures and institutions, or what I'm going to talk about a bit, but I look forward to a conversation where we can engage on how we can make this a reality. The first, for me, is the issue of housing. Because I think that housing connects to so many bedrock values that we have of safety, of economic opportunity, of a real sense of belonging and place and community. And right now, I don't think we are equipped to really charge down the hill and address our challenges here. I think we need to lock in to a core tenet that everyone in this country should have access to a safe, stable, and affordable place to live. And this is something that we need to state more clearly. This is something that is a bipartisan virtue, and it requires a reorientation of the way that we do things, right? When you think about the Department of Housing and Urban Development, it presents connotations of subsidized housing, connotations of poverty, instead of an agency focused on making sure that everybody has that safe, stable, affordable place to live. When you think about the other entities, the acronyms of agencies involved with housing finance, people don't know what they are, but they do know that they make housing seem out of reach. So one of the things that I think our government should focus on as we build in an optimism for the future is a commitment to this virtue. Singularly placing an agency in charge of production, affordability, access. This is something that delivering on, again, would inspire for the American people a sense of government getting things done. And we had an opportunity recently to make some real investments in housing. When the president, in the first couple of years, when I was at the White House, passed and brought forth the Build Back Better plan, a real commitment to building new housing, supporting the dreams of first-time home buyers with assistance, providing increased number of housing vouchers for low-income families, dramatically increasing low-income housing tax credit to inspire production, and exploring new ways to incentivize zoning changes, right, at the local level. But unfortunately, and this happens in negotiations, it fell out. Something that is so emotional for Americans, where we live, just didn't make it to the top of the list. So I think we need to go back and finish that work. The Inflation Reduction Act is still historic. We're addressing the cost of prescription drugs, the existential crisis of climate change. Something really substantial came together. However, when it comes to an issue that really creates a feeling of pain across so many communities here in our country, we have to show Americans that we care. There's no other reason that we can't bring this about other than partisan gridlock. But when I talk to Republicans on the House floor, when I talk to Republicans in many rooms, they care about housing too. So we have to break this down. That is a way that we bring forth hope out of a feeling of despair. Another issue that I care a lot about in my free time of late is one that inspires me to get ahead of another crisis, one that has caused a ripple of anxiety across our economy, across higher education institutions like this, and that's the growth of artificial intelligence and its unknown impacts on our daily lives. And it's here, just be clear, AI is all around you. And it seems pretty obvious to me that the framers weren't really thinking about artificial intelligence when they were drafting the Constitution. It would have been much easier for them to write the document if they just put it in ChatGPT. So we have really institutions that aren't necessarily made to and designed to address these challenges on the front end. And that often creates an imperative for us to slow down, to do less, to make sure that we don't get ahead of a problem. However, we know that the impacts on every part of our life from AI is here right now. The impacts are here. You know, I think about just a couple weeks ago, we had AI imitating the president's voice in the New Hampshire primary. Now, let's be very clear. That may have been for a campaign that wasn't going anywhere, but that's a test. And if somebody tries something like that once, you better believe they're going to try it again. So deepfakes, other AI-generated content, making it difficult to discern the facts, discern truth. That's going to be more present in our lives. And so we need to create policy that adequately moves in the direction of avoiding problems that lie ahead. This, again, is something that should inspire optimism, that our government is going to get ahead of a potential threat to our way of life, from worker displacement to how we engage everything from driving to the grocery store, boarding an airplane. We should have confidence that government is going to try to get ahead of problems. The last area that I want to talk about in terms of reorienting our fears into hope and inspire action is the issue of gun violence. And I saw a lot of this firsthand at the White House in terms of mass events. You know, I was always up late at night waiting to see if an email would come in from the Situation Room or something I'd see on Twitter. And really, over and over and over and over again, you would see these mass incidents. And from celebrating joyous occasions to going to the movies or attending school, everything is infringed upon because of this fear we have of a threat of gun violence. And I actually struggle to name a venue where we haven't had the impact of gun violence. And what we all know, and what is the most infuriating part of the whole thing, is that we know what to do. We know what to do. And our challenge here is we have political gridlock. We have partisanship. We have a threat, but no way to respond to it. And so where do we go from here? Right? We can run down the litany of things that we need, from assault weapons bans to safe storage laws to universal background checks to making the NIH an institution that researches this as an epidemic, which will drive resources, taking away the ability of gun manufacturers to not be liable here for the product they create. We know it. But this is where a consistent focus on winning not just elections, but winning hearts and minds, continuing to work towards building hopefulness out of despair is the challenge. And it's a challenge that oftentimes we get distracted by. We can't just wait until we see the headline on the scroll on CNN. We need to go beyond the paralysis, the normalization that we've seen. And in some pockets, we have seen such amazing response, encouraging, courageous response from our students organizing, from local leaders stepping up. But this is one again. Delivering results is not the end here. Of course, we will try over and over and over again to ensure that we are committed to ending gun violence, but showing it that passion in a concerted effort to organize, to look at the promise of eliminating gun violence by bringing people together. That is what we need to achieve. So housing, artificial intelligence, gun violence, things you didn't think were really connected. But I think here is that they aren't simple issues that we're going to solve overnight. My argument is that what our charge is in government, and should be, is being relentlessly focused on the path forward in areas that are hard, areas that are difficult, but where we can demonstrate that we are responding to the concerns of people who don't think their government cares about their outcomes. And so a lot of this, for me, is driven by my experiences in government. At the state and local level, you have to show up. There's no option of deferring, because you're going to see people in the grocery store. You're going to see people at church. You're going to see people on the airplane. And so I truly believe that that proximity is critically important to making sure that we are connected in this process, that our elected officials are not separate and distinct from the experiences that we share. And so we've done significant things. And the curious thing about referring to the government, as I have multiple times, is that we are the government. People like you and I make up the government that we need, inform its actions, and meaning that the way that we're going to get this done is by encouraging action amongst all of us. And so how do we tackle these contemporary issues, many of which are a different iteration of past problems, and what responsibility do each of us have to be engaged? My thoughts came in my research for this lecture. They're drawn to a refrain from the late Congressman Elijah Cummings, who throughout his own lecture, his own Krieger lecture, said, "Does anyone care about us?" The us there being those who can't afford childcare or their prescription drugs, those who have lost a friend or family member to senseless violence, the surviving family of a victim of police brutality, the LGBTQ plus kid who does not know what bigoted law their state legislature will pass next, the woman who has started looking into ways to travel in the event that she needs an abortion, the voter who goes to vote only to realize that they are thrown off the voter rolls. Look, the question of does anyone really care about us is deeply entangled with the tension between hope and despair and how we choose to respond to it. The truth is, each of us has a choice to make. It's not one that's made in isolation or at one moment in time. Instead, it's a choice that we face every single day, between throwing our hands up and walking away, or continuing to work to advance the cause of government, to be a force for good in the lives of people it serves. Engaging in our democracy is to see a problem or notice someone's pain and to respond to Congressman Cummings' question by saying, "I care enough to work toward a solution. I care enough to try to alleviate their suffering." Choosing to stay engaged is an exercise in staring down daunting realities and staying focused on the pursuit of progress. This is the same pursuit that led me to a career in public service. You might say, why does the son of two West African immigrants, working class family, want to be in politics? And politics is such a dirty word sometimes. But it's the passion for service, the desire to see someone else's life be improved in any way. That's what drove me here. And so my ask of you is, if you think that there is more to be done, ignore the calls of those who argue that everyone might as well just give up entirely rather than work to move the ball forward. Every day, I ask myself, am I taking seriously my potential to make change? Am I taking seriously my responsibility to work towards change? And I'm, unable to think of a substitute for the oftentimes thankless work that a lot of people we interact with in the public service sphere do. From our teachers to our healthcare workers to civil service employees and political appointees to first responders and nonprofit leaders, public servants do so much to empower their communities, invest in them to make them better. But to the students especially here, I hope public service is a calling that many of you consider answering. Aside from public service, though, there are many avenues to pursue change that categorically reject a wholesale capitulation to cynicism and despair. You may think that their importance has been overstated, but I believe every single day, and certainly when I got to cast a vote this last September and November, I believe the power of the vote is one that we shouldn't take for granted. I think that every time we opt out, someone else wins, and that someone else isn't necessarily us. When a person decides to be, apolitical and not vote, they're allowing decisions to be made by others. And I certainly don't believe that that's something we should cede. The decision to opt out is one that allows the responsibility that we have to one another to be borne exclusively by everyone besides ourselves. And when disengaging is pursued by a broader set of people, by a broader collective, a vacuum can quickly emerge and be taken advantage of. And we see this right now throughout our country. When I look at opinion polling and I see people saying, don't care, not interested, none of the above. You hear focus group after focus group. I just saw a few weeks ago. And people feel hopeless. But we're all charged here, right, to think and have an imagination for the possible that we can bring forward in our government rather than just deferring to those in power. But we should think about the collective. Think about the collective that can benefit. And I, am sure that there are many qualms with our options this fall. I just spoke to a group of students who had some real legitimate concerns. But the only way that we can keep moving the ball forward is by holding those in power accountable and making sure that we do this at the ballot box and not merely drop out. And so I have, a political statement to make. I think we have a real threat to our democracy, and it is incredibly important that no one takes that lightly. This is a serious choice this November. And especially to those students I know who may be from some battleground states, I hope you make your voting choices wisely, because this is really important, and we're depending on you. So, to conclude, I want to spend some time thinking back with you in an exercise about the emails that you received during the first few months of the pandemic. And think about the words that come to your mind. I'm sure you remember the number of emails it started with. I hope this email finds you well during these unprecedented times. Haven't we heard that word a lot? Unprecedented. It's been in headlines, it's been in the leads of stories, it's been everywhere. And I do truly believe that we're living in unprecedented times. And these times can be met and have been met and characterized by increasing instability and overwhelming amounts of grief, and the real connection to suffering. And it's not surprising to me that people are frustrated or tired and feeling like there's no use in staying committed. But I think back to a line in the Bible in the book of Galatians. I did go to Catholic school for 9 years. And the line says, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at a proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." A harvest if we do not give up. I implore you to step into the breach and embrace hope over despair, drawing great energy from the optimism maybe that you get from me, but it's something that I know you can unlock as well. Because no matter how slowly we make progress as a country, and yes, progress is often far too slow, the struggle to improve our own lives and the lives of those around us will always be worth it in the end. You know, Martin Luther King did not say the arc of the moral universe would bend towards justice overnight. He said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And what I would add there, when we come together and bend in the same direction. It's up to each of us. Do we join in? Do we pick up a shovel and dig in whatever ways we're able? Or do we collapse into paralysis on the crises of the day? I signed up to never put that shovel down. And I implore you all to think about the ways that you will pick a spot to dig so that we can build towards a better future and a better tomorrow. So thank you.
So I think we're a pretty crowded room. So I wonder, Othniel, I wonder if we would just want to pass the mic around for questions, or want people to line up for questions? It just feels like people are going to have to get up, get over people. I don't know. What do you think? Okay. I want to make sure people have time to ask questions, and I know there's a lot of students here. We'll have to get to the meal plan. So does anybody want to ask the first question? Or do you want me to ask the first? Oh, there we go. We have a couple people. Okay. So we have, I'm going to go with David first, right? And then the woman in the back behind that.
Thank you. You mentioned the protection of democracy. I was reading recently that the Providence Journal has a print edition now of only 20,000. How do you, and one assumes there are other readers of our local paper online, but not many. In a city of 190,000, in a metropolitan area of 1.5 million, we have a paper print of only 20,000. Do you think democracy can function with a non-existent press?
That's a great question. No, in short, I think we need a press that thrives, because in that vacuum, right, you fill it up with all sorts of, noise. Just this morning, in fact, I was on radio in Woonsocket, which is an adventure. Because
were you in Woonsocket for the radio?
Oh yeah, I went all the way to Woonsocket at 7:45 this morning. So that was a trip. I packed a bag, and so. But this is a very interesting radio station. They don't take live callers, but they will take people coming through the switchboard with their question. And someone had made some comment about how I've voted continually to keep the border open. I haven't had a single vote regarding border open. That's just not a thing. And I was trying to break it down. And I've been thinking about this all day long. I actually said it when I was with some students earlier. And I don't know, he probably heard from somebody, or somebody posted on Facebook. And so the vacuum exists. When you look at, especially Facebook is a fascinating thing because demographically, it's shifted, right? So I would say, and just seeing this in my own recent election, the key age groups for information on Facebook are 50 plus. Right. I'm not on TikTok. It's an active conversation. I just don't know how to dance. So I don't know if we're going to be on TikTok. And then Instagram is actually, there was an article today about it becoming a news source. So the challenge there is everybody is the editor. And if everybody's the editor, then no one's the editor. And so we do need a functioning press. There are some nonprofit models that are out there. That still requires money. They still need to pay reporters. And so Congressman Cicilline actually had been involved in some work to advance some different models around funding the press. But we do need to figure out a way to get those people employed in jobs, because what will happen is there's a vicious cycle. The reason the circulation is low is completely tied to them having fewer reporters and covering fewer things. So we need it.
We had another question. Yes, ma'am.
Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for your talk. I really appreciated your emphasis on actively addressing problems. I'm in the sciences, and I'm part of a discussion group of science instructors about how to make science education at the college level more accessible and welcoming to people from all groups and all backgrounds. And we meet and discuss articles and very earnestly talk about how to change science education at the college level. And the whole time there's just something nagging at me, which is that it's really the K through 12 level where people are, not receiving the same resources and preparation for their college science classes. And, the school funding formula seems massively unfair. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts or ideas about what could be done to improve that.
Yeah, it's a great question. As the newest member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, I have some opinions. I think STEM education is critically important. When I talk to employers of any type, they want to know that there are certain capacities for young people, and the ability to gain some of those through the traditional K-12 system is how you build the foundation. The challenge ultimately is when it comes to the federal government and education, it's sort of an uneven relationship, right? You have the key part of the federal role is in funding Title I schools, and that's where most of it is drawn. You might have other sort of opportunities to engage, and certainly in the Biden-Harris administration, there hasn't been a lot outside of the return to school, which was really important. And I didn't talk about COVID that much because I feel like we've got that collective memory, we've all experienced it, but you think about how disruptive to years and years and years of science education COVID was. I mean, you're going to have massive gaps for a long time in the experiential piece of that as well. And so I bring that up because there hasn't been a whole lot of new investment in the federal role. However, there's a lot that happens at the state level, and I'm hopeful that when I think about the areas where we can grow the most, the connective tissue to our institutions of higher learning, to our anchor employers, they want to breed a workforce that is capable of engaging on really technical things down the road. But if they have a bigger role earlier, my hope is if you get those institutions, those anchor institutions involved earlier, you can have a partner in some of that work to make it more experiential, to make it more focused on the needs of tomorrow.
Okay, any other questions? Lucy, in the back, and then we'll go to you. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for doing this talk. I had a question similar, going off of that one. So you mentioned that you think it's really important, like the connection to the community and focusing on kind of domestic work, and going off the education, like specifically the Providence Public School District has struggled a lot over the years, getting millions in funding, not knowing what to do with it, having a hard time like keeping teachers and stuff. And so I'm interested in what your specific like involvement in education would look like.
Yeah, well, you're gonna get me in trouble because I have a lot of friends who are working in other levels of government, but they all know the things that I will say, so I'm okay. The biggest problem in Providence biggest problem is English language learners and the resources that they don't have. There's a massive gap in terms of the teachers who are able to teach those students. There might be a couple hundred, probably need 400 or 500 students. That would help close gaps quickly. I mean, the great thing about Providence is that it is a place where people come from a lot of different places. I've shared my story, and there's a range of countries that people come from. However, we need to fully integrate as many of those students into school, catch them up, and reduce the barriers that learning English often set up. At a sort of broader level, Providence schools are constantly in a cycle of change. Whether it's states running them, whether there's a new report from a different educational institution researching the problems. It's almost always dealing with new superintendents, new personnel. At some point, that's unsustainable, and in fact, we are at that point. Where I see my role is to the extent that there are federal resources, especially to deal with the teacher pipeline challenges. That is where I want to lean in, because I do believe that at the school level is where we're going to be able to deal with some of these issues. And you can see that because there are differences when you go across the city to different neighborhoods and have different outcomes for students. So that's one of the biggest ways. And then, I mentioned this before. I do think that, especially for our high schoolers, in the secondary ed piece of this, is working to build stronger ties between those anchor institutions for the outcomes for some of our young people to be able to get into the workforce, because and that there are resources that usually are around for that, whether it's at the Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, Department of Education, to bring those three agencies together to bring forth some resources is what I'd be focused on, what I will focus on.
I have a couple of follow-ups, so I'm saving them.
Thanks for your lecture. So I was wondering, you mentioned partisan gridlock a couple times in your speech, and do you think that with that, state and local governments will start to take on more responsibility in the policy issues you mentioned? And based on your experience on both levels, is that a good thing?
Yes, I do think empowered state and local governments are important, but I have a bias. I spent a lot of time with mayors across this country, and I see what they're able to do, and it's to cut through. I had, hundreds of Zooms with mayors where the only answer to the problem was, give me the money directly. Now, that's part of the thing, but I do believe that not all of them are created equal, so you can't, just throw resources out there. There has to be accountability baked in. But that's where the federal government can be a great partner. We don't necessarily have the ability, especially you look at all of this $4 trillion of money that has gone out for the Rescue Plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, so much more. I can keep going. But it's out there, but you don't have an ability to scale technical assistance and implementation for every single community in America. So how do you do that? You have to break down and not only have our localities be the keepers of the story, but the keepers of the work plan to get some of these things done. And it can be done in great partnership. I do think breaking down the difference between our federal, state, and local governments it will be a legacy of COVID and a lot of the response and funding that came through it. So I think we should test that a little more.
We have questions on this side too. So we're going to take one question over here and then 2 questions over there. And before Othniel gets there, quick question for you, and then we'll go to the next. Is You just discussed a potential private-public partnership with employers and students in high school. We know that there are a number of examples around the country of this working. In southern states in particular that are less union-heavy, they tend to be more prevalent. What about the messaging that says we want you to go to college, finish your degree and then go to college, because over your lifetime you'll earn more money with a college degree, either 2-year or 4-year. And then the other messaging, which is when you're in high school, let's actually encourage you to learn a trade or learn technology or learn something that you'll go right into after you graduate high school. How do we combine those two messages, particularly to individuals either in slash immigrant or underserved or low-income communities that may think college is prohibitive? So in terms of policy, how do we steer people?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question and ripe for analysis. The challenge that we have is the burden of the cost of higher education is also a factor there. But I look at someone in Rhode Island who makes a decision to go become a welder at Electric Boat, and I know there's going to be 40 years of work, and they may be able to be promoted, and they actually like the work. And I don't think that is in opposition to getting a degree in English from the University of Rhode Island or Brown. I just think we have to do a better job of laying out the options, working with the capacities of students to thrive in a particular environment, because one of the more heartbreaking statistics when you look at student loan data is the amount of loan burden carried by students who don't complete. And so what did we force upon in some cases for educational outcomes? Did we say you just have to go to college no matter what, and if that experience doesn't work out, you still have to be saddled with these payments for the rest of your working life? And a lot of those loans balloon, and so you have people paying off loans for colleges they never actually completed. So I don't think they're in conflict. I do think this is a burden on our administrators to really ensure that we're steering, but we're not pushing students into particular tracks or outcomes. We're not Germany, right? We are more flexible, and I say that having just spent a few days with some Germans in Munich. But I do think that we can be nimble in the way that we assess next steps for our students.
Thank you. So we have a question here and 2 questions over there. Yeah.
They say that all politics are local, so I want to ask you about a very local issue, which addresses the ineffectiveness of government. Is there a role for the federal government in addressing the Washington Bridge crisis? Because it is a crisis.
I was almost certain I wasn't going to get one of those questions. No, it's the question I answer every day. Yes, of course there's a role. But so 3 things need to happen. And this is how I've generally oriented myself with this issue. 1, we need to be facts and evidence-based as it comes to this discussion. So much of this conversation is happening on talk radio, at the coffee shop, at the at the restaurants, where nobody really knows much. And I actually think that is partially a fault of government. I do think if we lean in and are transparent through our process of analysis, and I understand we're waiting for a final report, people will appreciate the fact that you attempted to tell them exactly what was going on. In the absence of that, you're going to fill the void. We talked about it with the news media. People are going to fill the void. So that's 1. We have to be fact-based, evidence-based. Then part 2 is where I do what I've done my whole career. When I was a political organizer, when I worked for Sheldon Whitehouse when he was running for Senate in 2006, we had rules for the organizers. I think rule number 4 was your phone is your weapon. So I'm going to pick up the phone and work it as much as I can. I've spoken to the Secretary of Transportation multiple times already. They are waiting to help. They, in fact, are helping in some ways. The Federal Highway Administration is helping already with some of the technical analysis and doing whatever they can to help, which is great. But when there is a need for federal resources, I will ask alongside the most effective appropriator in Rhode Island's history, Senator Jack Reed, and Senator Whitehouse, and we'll do everything we can to help this most important part that connects, both parts of my district. Then the last bit is more emotional. I talked about how people feel. I'm trying to be very intentional about considering people's feelings, and you have to talk about issues of disruption like this to the economy, to people's commutes, to their lives as a really emotional thing. Rhode Islanders and our vehicles, it's a very special bond, right? Those license plates aren't low numbers for no reason. We feel a certain way about how we move about, right? And so acknowledging, right? The first step is acknowledging, is feeling the pain. I don't think it's satisfactory to minimize this because, look, we all have things that go on that seem like barriers to us, and this seems like one. I needed to drive to Warren the other day, and I said, what time should I leave? What time should I leave? Should I leave an hour early? Like, you just don't know. And so connecting to the feeling part of this is really important.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, kind of continuing on the idea of the federal and state cooperation. This Thursday, for example, we have a lobbying day for gun safety. Moms demand action at the State House. Is there any relationship that you have we've made some progress in terms of gun safety here in Rhode Island, but we're still gun safe storage and the assault weapons ban. Both of these are really still outstanding for us. I'm wondering, is there any role that you can play or the federal government can play at all in helping move this along for us? Especially the focus on Thursday at 3:30, by the way, at the State House, is gun safe storage.
Well, that is a meaningful plug. So if you care, show up. Right? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And that's a really important issue. Look, I've generally said, and every member of Congress does this differently. Like, what role do you play in state issues? My role is, if I'm going to talk about something at the federal level, then I will talk about it at the state level. And I think if I care about a federal assault weapons ban, which I'm a co-sponsor of, then if I have the capacity to be here on Thursday, unfortunately, I'm going to be struggling to keep a government open. But I would be here. But I will communicate with leaders, both in the judiciary committees and others, to say that this is important to me. So I do think that every member of Congress has a different flavor on it, and my goal is to be consistent with the values I'm pushing in Washington and the values I care about here at home.
We have another question.
Thank you, Congressman Amo, for coming to speak with us. I'm in Professor Schiller's class, and just this morning we were talking about the importance of freedom of speech in American democracy, and it's certainly been in the public discourse in recent months, years, on social media and college campuses. So I'd be curious your thoughts and comments on how the protection of freedom of speech plays into your vision of sort of reinvigoration of democracy.
Yeah, I think it's an important one, and especially right now. I mean, I'm on a college campus where free speech is alive and well. That we keep it as a paramount value. I do think where we are and the tension that we face, and everything feels more intense right now, especially because of social media. I do think the volume of images that you get, the volume of messages, just does something to your brain. And I'm looking forward to the science around this, hopefully sooner rather than later, because it's why I don't have Twitter on my phone anymore. I look at Twitter from my desktop. It's why I do tweet often. My team and I workshop them, but they send it to me. I don't post them myself because I don't know if I have the ability to focus on the things I have to do every day and deal with the comments. And I get the comments. They come to me eventually, maybe slower than the normal person. But where that fits into your point is, we're being inundated and with messages, and I do think sometimes people use freedom of speech as a blanket to allow them to say whatever. Right now, I do know that we have a high threshold on sort of stepping in on that freedom. I would generally hold to even when it's things I don't like, even when it's things that are offensive, even when it's things that are uncomfortable, to erring on the side of the protection of that freedom, because we are living in a time where being uncomfortable is not something alone that should allow me to shut people off, not constitutionally, and certainly not just interpersonally. But there is a balance. But I lean on the side of making sure that people can express themselves, how they'd want, because there's always going to be a threat to that freedom, and I don't want to buy in to the argument that we aren't able to have real balance. We can seek it out, and we do know what is decent, and we do know what is right to do as human beings. But I think that's something that we have to continue to litigate amongst ourselves.
I think that's a great, I know people have been very patient. So I think what I do is I'm going to ask you one question that I don't think you'll be expecting, but I don't think will be that hard. And then we'll wrap up the formal part of our evening. And I think Congressman Amo is available for just a couple of minutes to talk to people if you want to get up and mill about and say hello. So we'll do that for those people who have to go. So tell us about literally your first day on the job. I have that question. Part A is your first day on the job. Literally, how was that? And second, who was the first member of Congress? 3 parts. First, what was your first day like? Who was the first member of Congress to invite you to coffee or lunch? And 3, how do you think your role as a congressperson, particularly the first congressperson elected of color from the state of Rhode Island, how will that path, in terms of what you advocate for and sort of how you will respond to constituents and what they expect of you, how do you think that will differ from your predecessor, David Cicilline?
Wow. You went from easy to hard. First day. So I got elected in the general election on November 7th. On November 10th, I got an email saying, we're going to swear you in on November 13th. Oh, great. So promptly, I decided to ask how many people I could invite. And they said, yeah, 8 to 10. So I invited 100. 60 showed up, which is, taking advantage of the new speaker was part of the play there. But in all seriousness, it was an intense day. I got off. I came in the night before, went in, I had somebody greet me and say, I'm going to walk you to your office. And it's a big office for a freshman. Thank you, David Cicilline, again. In the Rayburn building where a lot of senior members are.
You're in the Rayburn building.
I know, right?
Yeah, you scored.
Moving on up. And it was overwhelming. I almost started crying. But you had to start doing stuff. They said you can sit at your desk. We got to sign you into your computer. There were a lot of logistics. They had to take me to a room above the Capitol or above the House floor where they give you your PIN, they give you your card. They've introduced you to the Sergeant at Arms, the chief physician, all of the people who are responsible for you. Usually this happens over a couple days for somebody, and a special election happens in 45 minutes. And I really don't remember anything from this conversation with them. And then you walk down to the floor. And, think about a school cafeteria. The House floor is a little like a school cafeteria. If you ever watch C-SPAN, I could do a seating chart for you, but CBC sits over here, the CHC sits over here, there, the Midwestern members are here, Californians are a block, so they sit together. It's fascinating. And everybody comes up to you and says hello, and you're supposed to remember all their names. And a quirk of a special election is that you get to speak immediately after you're sworn in. So they did tell me this in advance. It was not a pop quiz. But I had prepared remarks, and I actually got to spend time with Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, in his office, with Senators Reid and Whitehouse and Congressman Magaziner and my family. So we got to take pictures, and I walked out to the floor with Leader, I went to the floor, and then I went to Leader Jeffries and walked back out onto the floor with him. And you get introduced by the dean of your delegation. Well, my good friend Seth Magaziner, who has been in Congress 10 months prior to me, got to introduce me. And he gave a wonderful speech, and then it was my turn. And so obviously my voice was, quaking, and I was shaking. But eventually you get into it. And it's a congressional minute, so it's really supposed to be 3. I think I did 5. No one's going to be mad at you. And I had 60 of my loved ones in the gallery. And that leads into, the other thing I would say is it's usually done on the first night of votes. So I had about 420 some odd of my colleagues there who I hadn't met before, both Republicans and Democrats, standing and clapping for you. So you don't get to have, that was like a State of the Union. Like that doesn't happen. And after my remarks, the first person to come up to me was Congressman, to ask me to coffee. I had a lot of people saying hello, but to ask me to coffee was Congressman Joe Wilson from South Carolina.
Oh.
You may remember him
Yes.
from a certain State of the
Eli.
Union years ago. But he's such a kind soul. He is actually the ranking member on one of my subcommittees on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. And we've spent time together, and he's always so generous in his introductions of me. I was with him and some leaders from Ukraine just last weekend, and he gave this warm introduction. Our newest member from Rhode Island by way of South Carolina. I don't know, he just made that up. And he is a very good guy. So the bipartisanship thing is possible. At least if we're pleasant to one another. And, on your last question, how will I be different than Congressman Cicilline? One, he is such a mentor, not only through this process. I have called him a lot, and we see each other a lot. But he brought forth a lot of himself into the role. Let's not forget, he was the first LGBT member of Congress from Rhode Island. And that brought a lot of attention to him and brought to the forefront of his work the Equality Act and so many other things. And so, I've signed on as a co-sponsor, but I bring a different life to it. In the same way, when I am, talking to, West African folks from Ghana, Liberia, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, others, I'm bringing myself in a different way, being the first, son of immigrants from those places. When I saw in passing at the Munich Security Conference representatives from Ghana, and they knew who I was. That's something that is, weird to me. I'm like, why do you know who I am? The 432nd ranked member of Congress. So that is fascinating. But I do think I'm a vessel, and I intend to be a vessel for the hopes and dreams of a lot of people who haven't seen themselves in this. And it may not be the same, right? I am not, discounting the folks who are descendants, folks who came to Rhode Island in bondage. When I've done all the Black History Months I've done this year, it has been special not because of who I am, but because of who people get to see themselves in, right? I don't stand alone in this. And so, that's a big part of it for me. And so how will that manifest itself in legislation? That's to be determined. I also have the experience of being a sort of career government staffer, right? And I do think that's a part of my identity that makes me very laser focused on, how to make government work from the perspective of those who I've worked for before. And so the multiple parts of my identity, I hope will manifest itself in the work, but more importantly, I hope it means that I'm accessible, that everybody feels some part of themselves in my story. I said very often along the campaign trail, the names might be different, the countries of origin might be different, but our stories are linked. Our stories are linked in the grit, resilience, hard work, determination of somebody who came before us to make sure that we would be able to live the lives we get to live today, that we would get to contribute to this world. And I'm just honored to be doing this work, and I'm honored to work for all of you.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman Amo, for coming down. It's been a great pleasure. And we are going to let you off the hook on the 24 election, but we hope to bring you back to campus certainly in the fall so we can have a further conversation. So thank you so much again.
I'll be back.